Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising as we appreciate a very unique day in the American tradition and in the American annual calendar, Thanksgiving. And we revisit this origin story shrouded in both history and myth that has evolved over 2.5 centuries of the national journey of the United States around the first Thanksgiving. And in that spirit, I just want to express my own thanksgiving for all of you. And as I was contemplating my opening remarks today, I realized that, we cover so many diverse areas of human concern and human endeavor and human vision and human effort in our very complex world, ranging from wars and genocide to paraphenomenal research and remote viewing to all kinds of healing techniques and youth at risk and climate change, and all in the effort to enable humanity to rise. And I was reflecting on how great it is in the midst of all these swirling issues and challenges, how great it is to be alive in our time with the challenges that are confronting each and every one of us, not only individually, but as communities and as a species, as we both teeter on the brink of self-destruction and we are experiencing breakthroughs in human consciousness and human solidarity at the same time. It's as if we're breaking down and breaking through in multiple areas simultaneously, and we're being pulled and ripped asunder, and we're being brought together, and we're experiencing things that I think human beings probably have never experienced before. And I'm exhausted by it on some days. I'm stressed by it on other days. I'm excited by it on other days. But mostly, as I review the year as it begins to draw to a close, I realize just how deeply grateful I am to simply be alive and be healthy and to be in community with all of you. I'm uh, doing a lot of things, as you know, in Washington on the UAP disclosure, and still president of Ubiquity University, and have a lot of obligations in both those domains, and continue with uh, colleagues to convene Humanity Rising. And I think Humanity Rising in many ways brings me the most consistent joy because I'm the most consistently learning. And it always both triggers and satiates my curiosity. So I just want to acknowledge that. And I want to express real gratitude to the people that make this possible, starting with Georg Bach, who's our technical director at Ubiquity University and is just a master at his craft. This would not be happening, ladies and gentlemen, without Georg, day by day, faithfully just supporting these convenings in a Zoom reality that is always getting upgraded, always getting more complicated. And somehow Georg pulls things off as flawlessly as anyone I've ever worked with. So I want to just acknowledge Georg today. And I also want to acknowledge Stan and Shannon, who have equally faithfully, convened the after chat and just been supportive, Stan, and chronicling Humanity Rising. Without Stan, virtually none of this would be chronicled or organized. And he does it day after day with again, a faithfulness that is quite astonishing, given the scope of what he does. And Shannon, day by day, curating the after chats and making sure everybody's comfortable and acknowledging the different voices and so forth. And so I really want to acknowledge that, and the Ubiquity team and the various people in the Humanity Rising Network that have done the convenings. I just met yesterday with Tom Eddington, and Tom Eddington, we were counting up. He's done more programming than any other person, and we're planning what his next programs are going to be, and the inauguration of Donald Trump. We're going to do a week on resistance, strategies for resistance, because we know what we can expect from Donald Trump. And that'll be followed by a week on what does forgiveness mean during times of duress. So just sitting down for a couple hours with him and Michael Negler, mapping out the future of Humanity Rising and how we continue to keep it current, how we continue to give voice to truth as clearly as we can, knowing that it makes some people uncomfortable, but nevertheless being ruthlessly realistic about the current state of the world, whether it's in Ukraine or Gaza or other areas of the world, and human contradictions is part of what sets us free. It's always the truth in the end that sets us free. And even though there are many pathways to peace, there is the surest pathway. It's just understanding the truth of reality. And that truth is the blind people and the elephant. Absolutely. But there's still the elephant. So even though there's different perceptions of truth, there's still truth. And that bedrock is the cornerstone of what we seek to do for Humanity Rising. So I just want to acknowledge all of you and tell you how much I love you and how much I'm inspired by you, and also to be here, since I'm in Washington most of the time, with my family, my dear Claire and our two sons. Was with them yesterday at the farmer's market where Luke was selling his beautiful wood artwork. It fills your heart with joy just to see the next generation blossoming in their authenticity and the exuberance of youth. So I want to just say thanks to everyone. And now I'd love to introduce Connie and Andrew. You know them well. They've been frequent contributors to Humanity Rising. They are known for many things, but they wrote the book, The Trust Frequency, and a film series on the future. And they are really specialists in this origin story of the United States and the Pilgrims and the Native Americans that were there when the Pilgrims landed in Massachusetts back in 1621. So I'm going to turn it over to Connie and Andrews. Today will be more brief than usual because we know that most of you have dinners to make and families to enjoy. But we thought we would honor Thanksgiving with an expression of gratitude and a reminder of our origin as Americans. So Connie, Andrew, thank you so much. I turn the program over to you.
Well, it's a delight to follow you, Jim, with your uplifting look at the transformation of consciousness, because that's what we're into, and that's what we're looking to share about the origin story of this nation, because the origin story of a nation is key to its psyche, and it's shrouded in misconception and misunderstanding. And we bring the high vision of the spiritual alignment of the Mayflower Pilgrim separatists and the Native Americans that they lived amongst in peace and friendship for 54 years. that there was a great synthesis that occurred between the two that gave birth to the American mind, spirit, and democracy that has yet to come into fruition, the high vision of our founders. And that vision has to do with freedom of conscience, that we came to relate directly to the divine, and that we're progressing in that process into our alignment with our divinity. And that is Native way, the creator-based way of life. And the Mayflower Pilgrims were looking to develop a society based on that. So we're going to Andrew's going to share a story of the before the Mayflower, and from Europe and from Turtle Island. And he's written a book called The Mayflower Revelations, which he did extensive research. And this book brings forth, it's a novel that brings forth the story in an entertaining way. So
it's a
historical novel.
Mystery novel.
Historical novel. But what we're going to do is we're going to open with a friend of ours, a Pokanoket clan grandmother, Barbara Mary Kurfis, who's been a friend of ours for many years, and we've presented over the years with her to bring forth this heart and spirit of the Native people in conjunction with the spirit of the Pilgrims, and that 54 years of peace and that 3-day harvest celebration that occurred 400 and how many years ago?
403 years ago, right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
and why don't you mention the painting background?
Oh yeah. So here's the painting by Karen Ronaldo of the exact number of people who attended that 3-day harvest celebration. All the pilgrims are according to who they actually were, including 2 of my ancestors, John Alden and Priscilla Mullins.
And Barbara's ancestors.
And then the 90 plus Native people who were there. So that's, we're usually there in Plymouth every Thanksgiving to be with the Native people and with my ancestors. I mean, my cousins, of which there are so many. Anyway, we'll go now to a little pre-record that we did with Barbara because she's busy with family today. But if Georg could show that, that would be great. Hi, Barbara. It's just so great to be with you again this Thanksgiving time, like our ancestors were over 400 years ago. Thank you so much for bringing in an opening prayer and song. And now I'm going to hand you the feather and let you come on.
Taniska Nitomp. Hello, friends. In 1621, my ancestor Asamiquan, the Massasoit, and his brother Quadaquina, my ancestor grandfather, met with the Pilgrims for the first harvest feast, which is now called Thanksgiving. Also, my ancestor Pilgrim Stephen Hopkins was present on that day. So I walk in 2 worlds. So with the coming together in friendship, let us pray. Great Spirit, bring us our hearts together in love and understanding as we walk to the future in love and friendship and keeping us together in peace. Amen. Now, I would like to sing our song, our thank you song, and I'd like to sing it in our Algonquin language, and then I'll sing it in English. And then I have a little something to say at the end. A chance to get going here. Tabatne Wuchi AKK Tabatne Wuchi Nippy Quasnash Tabatne Wuchi Mate Quas Kesa Katana Tabatni Hey Hey Thank you for the earth and sky. Thank you for the water and the rocks. Thank you for the trees and just for today. Great Spirit, I thank you. Great Spirit, I thank you. Hey, hey, hey. Tabatni Anawan. Thank you, all my relations, for coming together in love and with friendship and in peace. Love and blessings for all of us in this coming time.
Thank you so much, Barbara. Such a treat to have the Pokanoket people represented here and who were there at that first Thanksgiving and now celebrate unity and oneness and love with the world. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
So wonderful. Thank you, Georg. And we actually have another video. I don't know, Georg, if you're there, if you could just show that other video we discussed. We wanted to
Okay,
screen.
1 second.
Okay,
Yeah, that'd be
sweet.
fantastic.
We wanted to screen it at the end, but that's not possible. So we're just going to show it now, and it expresses the friendship between the Pilgrims and the natives.
And these are little tiny clips from two of our films.
From one of our films.
They're both from the same film.
Seeds of Freedom, A Vision for America, and we'll put that in the chat, a link to our film. So
we'll get a native perspective and an English Pilgrim perspective. Here we go.
Here we go.
We have found the Indians very faithful in their covenant of peace with us, very loving and ready to pleasure us. We often go to them, and they come to us. Some of us have been 50 miles by land in the country with them. Not only the greatest king amongst them, called Massasoit, but also all the princes and peoples round about us, have either made suit unto us, or been glad of any occasion to make peace with us, so that 7 of them at once have sent their messengers to us to that end. So that there is now great peace amongst the Indians themselves, which was not formerly, neither would have been but for us. And we for our parts walk as peaceably and safely in the wood as in the highways in England. We entertain them familiarly in our houses, and they as friendly bestowing their venison on us.
As an American Indian, and I look back at these days of our first history, I just think it's a shame that the Plymouth paradigm did not endure. The Plymouth paradigm, as I understand it, was based on the idea of sharing, and everything was inclusive. Indians were not left out. They were part of the process, and they felt free to make themselves part of the process.
So there you have it. And we're now Andrew's now going to take you on a little journey, as I mentioned, to what led up to this situation here in Plymouth with the natives and the Pilgrims.
All right. So I'd like to mention this book that Connie mentioned earlier. I think you can see it. And if you look at the cover, you'll see the artwork there. And that person is split right down the middle. He's 50% Pilgrim and 50% Indian, just like Barbara, who was just blessing us this morning. And this book took a lot of research, so is a result of probably about 10 years of work. And it's about 700 pages, and it's a very entertaining novel. It's fun, it's contemporary, it's even sexy. It's a love story on the one hand, it's a dysfunctional family tale on the other hand, and it kind of sets the record straight on a great deal of the misbeliefs that currently exist. It's literally about a family who is divided to the point of kind of breaking up because their opinions about what happened back in 400 years ago are so at odds with each other. And there's a lot of emotions around those.
A lot of
books.
healing and a lot of coming
Yeah.
together.
So what?
Oh,
Yeah, you good?
Yeah.
So, dear friends, firstly, happy Thanksgiving. And I want to mention on a personal level, this today, right now, is my 55th anniversary of my arrival in America. I literally arrived to pick up a sailboat in Sea Island, Georgia on Thanksgiving Day of 1969. And good heavens, I'm still here. What's up with that?
yeah, thank goodness.
And I found myself American, as close as you could come to American aristocracy.
Oh,
I
come
mean,
on,
perfect.
no, let it go.
Come.
Okay.
I mean, come on. Just let me be. It's Thanksgiving.
Yes. Well,
So, friends, here, let's think of this as kind of like a shamanic journey, a historical shamanic journey. This entire Thanksgiving story is about the coming together of two very disparate cultures, a Native American group who had not previously had encounters with Europeans, some encounters, but not this kind of depth of relationship, and a group of English folks who came over with a certain amount of fear and trepidation because some things had happened prior. A lot of the early colonial attempts didn't make it. The people were just, they did not survive. So we've got, think about the pond, the famous pond, the Atlantic Ocean. On one side of the pond, in the late 1500s, and then we'll come to the same exact period in Turtle Island, in what today we call America, and Canada. There's a Canada component here. Okay, so there's some words that are going to come up. Jim mentioned one of them earlier. That word is genocide. I hate to bring that up, but as it's brought up, and it's brought up repeatedly in this context, just keep an eye as I speak and tell me at the end where you see that genocide having occurred. That's a rather challenging thought. So what was happening in the late 1500s? The single biggest thing that happened, and it was during the reign of Elizabeth I, okay? Good Queen Bess, as we English used to call her, the Queen of England. What was going on? Well, firstly, the British Empire was just getting going. We had Sir Francis Drake, the great explorer, traveling and putting up flags in various places and claiming real estate all over the world. That was going on the one hand. The other thing, and this is a critical turning point in history, and certainly in Western history, the Bible was translated into English. The very first Bible before the King James was called the Geneva Bible. It was actually translated in Geneva, Switzerland, into several languages, including England. So all of a sudden, devout Christians, instead of going to church and listening to a priest going on in Latin and then giving you his translation of that as accurate as that may have or may not have not been, all of a sudden they had the Bible on their dining room table. And being devout people, they read that Bible out loud to each other and to the families after every meal. What effect did that have? Well, firstly, think of England, think of Henry VIII, think of his breakup with the Pope and the establishment of the Church of England, today known as the Anglican or the Episcopalian Church. Decadence incarnate, for God's sake. Bishops in these crazy robes and ermine and all this stuff, living in these castles and these mansions. As they read the Bible, the ordinary people, They went, hang on, there's not one word of bishops or castles or wealth or hierarchy in the Bible. In the words of Jesus, there is none of that. So a certain group, and this came out of Cambridge University, Jim. I think you spent some time at Cambridge. This was late 1500s, Cambridge University. Some of the professors there began to say, wait a minute, this just ain't right. So you've heard of the Puritans, the Puritan movement. The idea of the Puritans was to purify the church, to just strip it down, and if it wasn't in the Bible, if it wasn't appropriate in their carefully considered opinion, was it possible to make a change? And the answer was hell no, because the king was the head of the church. And if you tried to change anything, that was an act of treason. And nevertheless, this group of people began to meet, often in secret. It was illegal, firstly, not to go to church. And secondly, it was illegal to have a church gathering or a religious gathering of any kind that was unauthorized by the king. Okay, situation, late 1500s. The Puritan movement started and ended up with Oliver Cromwell. It did not end well. The English Republican adventure was taxing, shall we say. But there was a spin-off group that emerged from the Puritan movement. And they were the ones who said, look, there's no chance, there's no way we can ever purify the church. We have to leave. They became known as the separatists. And the separatists include a group that are depicted behind us on the screen, the Mayflower Pilgrims, who were a group of separatists. You couldn't leave England, you couldn't practice your religion as you saw fit, but you couldn't leave either. So it was really, really challenging. And this is the most dramatic, extraordinary, heroic story that I'm aware of. I mean, of actual real history of real humans doing real things. And when we get over to America, it's just as dramatic and just as challenging. The Pilgrims ended up in Holland for 12 years. But after 12 years, and they were very restricted in Holland because of the guild system. They could not rise above a certain level. Now, the professors were teaching, this was in Leiden, with the most significant university in Europe, Leiden, Holland. And the professors were respected and had a voice, but everybody else was restricted by the guild system, where if you're not the blood relationship, literally the son of a member of the guild, you do not get to rise into a particular, you couldn't just go get a job somewhere, look in the New York Times and, make a phone call. They were very restricted. It was very challenging. And their kids were turning Dutch. And they were English. They were actually faithful Englishmen who honored their king, loved their country, and left for reasons that had nothing to do with not being a good Englishman, okay? So anyway, time came, it was time to go. And as we all know, they ended up getting this ship, the Mayflower, sailing across the Atlantic, taking 66 days to do so, 66 days. Now, I came here on a sailboat. I took 15 days to make the same journey. So think about that, 66 days at sea. They ran into a hurricane. It was at the peak of hurricane season. They very, very nearly sank. They very, very nearly lost their lives, all of them. And had that been the case, we would not be having this conversation today. America would not have been the same. Connie's ancestors would have perished in that adventure. So, and they arrived here in November of 1620, and the climate at the time was having a phenomenon that's described as a mini ice age. It was very, very, very cold. Their departure had been delayed to the point when they arrived much too late, and they did not come ashore until mid-December. Think about that. The temperature was probably at the high would have been 20 degrees, maybe 15. Okay, so here comes the Mayflower. They come ashore, and I'm going to stop there. They come ashore. Okay.
Well, first they draft the Mayflower Compact, which is really important. The first document of democracy,
Darn.
creating equal and just laws, serving the common good.
Beautiful, Connie.
It's
Thank you.
so important. Do look up the Mayflower Compact for the origin of this nation.
Yeah. So they came to harbor, they came to safety, they came to land, but they didn't come ashore before the men gathered together and created, they literally carried the seeds of democracy across the Atlantic. And they created a document today called the Mayflower Compact, which is regarded as one of the most important earliest documents of democracy as to how they would govern themselves once they came ashore. Let's stop there because they're about to meet the Indians, but they don't meet the Indians immediately. There is not a welcoming group of Indians on the beach. It wasn't like that at all. It was completely different. So we'll get there. Meanwhile, let's go back to the late 1500s in America. What was going on then? Anybody ever hear of the explorer Champlain? Ever hear of Lake Champlain? Champlain was the one who came. He was a Frenchman. The French were the first to arrive here. They arrived up north, and lots of people had been coming to the Great Banks, the Grand Banks, for fishing and so on. But the fur trade was beginning, and the fur trade, two things are absolutely essential to this story that I'm weaving today. The fur trade and the French. Okay, this whole thing is about the French. Had the French not been there, had the French not done what they did, again, this story would not have happened. This would not be, the Mayflower might have arrived, but if the Mayflower had arrived, guess what? There would have been in those fields behind us there would have been about 2,000 Native American warriors, and there's no way anybody could have come ashore and started a plantation or a colony, okay? Think about that. So what happened to those 2,000 warriors and their wives and kids and everything? Right here at this place, by the way, today is called Plymouth, Massachusetts. In those days, it was called Patuxet, and it was the home of a tribe of Native Americans called the Patuxets. Something happened to them because when the Mayflower arrived, they had disappeared. So start back with the French landing up north. The first tribe of Native Americans they connected with lived on an island today we call Nova Scotia. Today we call those people the Mi'kmaq. They called them the Tarratines. Now, Tarratines is clearly not a Native American word. It's not. It's a European word. It comes from the Basque fishermen who named them the Tarratines, and that caught on. So all the Europeans called the Mi'kmaq, called them the Tarratines. And I'm going to mention a very important piece of American history that is completely forgotten. But if you go Google this phrase, you'll learn a lot. It's totally available, or if you read any of my writings. The Tarratines War. Okay, the Tarratines War. So a lot of history has its dates, and often those dates have to do with wars. And I think the two most significant changes that really bring about major pivots in human relations, countries, cultures, religions, all of those things have to do with wars, and they have to do with differences of various kinds. Here's a very interesting difference. As the French established their very, very profitable fur trade, and once the beaver hat, have you ever heard of a beaver hat? So beaver pelts, skins, became a very big deal. They were very valuable. The Native Americans had tons of them. And so the fur trade became a very big deal. Now, guess what happened around the French fur trade up north? And this is up at the mouth of the St. Clair and the St. Lawrence Rivers, that part of the world. The French connected with the Tarratines, the Mi'kmaqs. And one of the early things they did is they traded guns, muskets, for furs. So this particular group of people, the Tarratines, got a hold of guns before any of the other tribes. However, some of the other tribes wanted in on the action. They wanted to become a part of this. They wanted to sell their furs to the Mi'kmaq were getting rich, and the Penobscot, right to the south, The Penobscot, who is still to this day in what's today called Maine, the Penobscot said, wait a minute, we need to be included here. And it became a big deal. And around about 1607, the Micmac, the Tarratines, I'm going to call them the Tarratines because I want you to know about the Tarratines War. It was a war between the Tarratines, Micmacs, and the Penobscots. And it started out with little skirmishes and things, and the French were trying to buy furs from, and it was all about dominance of a market. Okay, and there was many, many examples of that. There are ones that I'm aware of, don't have time now, but there were very significant ones that involved the Mohawks and those guys further up, further inland. So let's stick with just these two tribes. 1614, the Tarratines come across the river. They go to the Penobscot village. They kill the Bashaba. The Bashaba was the leader. They kill his entire family. And it's a very big deal. And they also grab a bunch of their women and children and take them back. And this was a very big escalation from about a 7-year series of conflicts. All of a sudden, this huge thing happens. The Penobscots had an ally to the south. Anybody ever heard of the Massasoit Federation? It was an alliance of native tribes based in the area of present-day Boston, present-day Massachusetts, recognize that, the Massasoit Federation, headed up by the man who I personally regard as the most significant, certainly the most significant Native American in American history. How many Native Americans can you think of in Native American history who are known to you by name? Quite honestly, I think there's very few. I'm going to mention a name. That name is Nana Pashamet, like Nana, like Connie's granddaughter would call her Nana. Nana Pashamet. Nana Pashamet, as the head of the Massasoit Federation, was an ally of the Penobscot. He heard about the runners came racing down, and because everybody had to travel either by canoe or by on foot, came down to Massachusetts, present day, said, we're in trouble. We had this horrible event. They've killed our leaders and we need help. And so help was swift in coming. So a group of Massachusetts warriors went up north to Penobscot country, crossed the river, went into Tarratine country, had some success, killed some people, killed some warriors, stole some women and children, and took them back to Massachusetts. Now that, my friends, was a very bad idea from a strategic standpoint, because the Tarratines, firstly, were very, very powerful warriors. Secondly, they had guns. And thirdly, they had, what's the word for it? High-speed water transportation methods that the natives to the south did not have. If you were down in Massachusetts, you traveled around on the water in a hollowed out log called a mishoon. If you were from up north, you traveled in a birch bark canoe, which could hold 12 to 24 warriors. And it's like the difference between an F-16 fighter and an old biplane from World War I. Okay, so just imagine what happened. So I'm going to skip to what that resulted in. So the Tarratines War suddenly, from being this little regional conflict up north, little intertribal conflict, all of a sudden, revenge was swift in coming, and it came by canoe, and it came down the coast. And now, let me say another thing about the Tarratines. It's too far north to grow corn. The growing season is too short. So how did they survive? They were a raider culture. They came down every harvest time, September, October. They showed up all the way along the shores of modern Massachusetts, Maine and Massachusetts, and they stole corn, beans, and squash and fair young maidens and made their way back home. And this had been going on for a very long time, hundreds of years. So the locals were used to that, and they had strategies to handle that. But all of a sudden, these people started showing up at the oddest times. As soon as it was warm enough to really travel. They'd show up in the spring, and wherever they showed up, they were looking for Nanapashamet, that particular person. Nanapashamet, his decision brought this onto the people. Nanapashamet built himself an incredible fort, the likes of which had never been seen in present-day Medford, Massachusetts. Connie, are you trying to tell me something?
Yeah, we need to keep moving.
Okay, I can stop.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
Go.
Because, I mean, you just do this and you do this and you do this, and it makes it
Okay.
very hard.
Okay, honey,
Okay.
keep going.
Just for 15 minutes, that's all I wanted.
Okay.
Tell me how much time I have.
Yeah, okay.
Because I'm trying to weave a tale here. I'm trying to take our friends here on a shamanic historical journey in their imagination. So now we know what happened coming from England, and now the Mayflower has arrived. What was going on in New England, which it was about to be named? The answer is the Tarratines' War. Let's start again let's hit the reset button to 1614, the year 1614. Captain John Smith of Pocahontas fame was on a mapping expedition in Massachusetts Bay, working for an Englishman who wanted to build a colony. And he was mapping, and he was traveling around, sailing around the waterways of Massachusetts Bay, I'm going to call it. I don't know, what was it called then? He came right here to Patuxet. He estimated 2,000 warriors, and he went to many other places, and he sort of gave a warrior account. They didn't talk about anything other than the number of warriors. And there were dozens of societies that had these groups of warriors, and there were tens of thousands of people on that coastline. Okay. Little did John Smith know while he was doing that, he didn't know what was going on up north. He had no idea. The news had not yet got there. The story I just told you about the Tarratines and the Bishaba and Nanapashamet and the Massachusetts Federation would have been news to him because he was on the water mapping. But what was happening at exactly that time was that these warriors were coming down now no longer in the fall to raid, but at any time at all, looking for vengeance, and in particular, they needed to find the king, the chief, Nanapashamet, and terminate him, kill him. Right, okay. Little did anyone know these warriors were carrying a European disease. And we know very clearly from the historical record that there was a pandemic. It was an epidemic, but it was actually a pandemic because a pandemic is global. And the disease that reached Massachusetts starts in China. We called it the Black Death, okay? It came to England in the 1300s. It killed 60% of Londoners, but it took a long time to get across the Atlantic. But when it did, it came across on almost certainly a French trading vessel, a fur trading vessel, and the Native Americans up north, the Tarratines, became infected with this disease. Now, we all know that the Black Death, bubonic plague, requires rats and fleas to transmit it. However, in malnourished communities, such as London in the 1300s, 1349, were horribly malnourished. They had rickets, and they died like, what's the term? Died like flies? It was absolutely horrific, and it was unprecedented. And the reason for this was malnutrition. When you are malnourished, the plague can take another form, which is called pneumonic instead of bubonic. Pneumonic plague is spread by coughs and sneezes. I grew up with an old story: coughs and sneezes spread diseases. And that is precisely what happened in London. That's what happened down the coast of New England. These warriors having no idea. Now, why would they be malnourished? Well, guess what? They used to get their food, their sustenance, by coming down and raiding cultures who were growing corn, beans, and squash all along the coastline. That stopped. From 1614 on, that was no longer an option. The people could not do that. Therefore, the raiders had nothing to raid. Think about that. So we had malnourished warriors coming down to malnourished communities, and all of a sudden, a disease that would have taken a long time and could not possibly have been that effective at eliminating 90% of the population became pneumonic. And imagine hand-to-hand combat and all of the things that go along with war. That disease decimated the coastal Native Americans between the years of 1616 and 1618. In 1619, they finally caught Nanapashamet, and they killed him. They tracked him down, they killed him, and that was 1619, and the Tarleton's War ended. That was from about 1607 to 1619. Very significant, utterly forgotten, utterly unknown, major war that changed everything in Turtle Island. 1619, the war ends. 90% of the Native Americans are gone. A year later, the Mayflower arrives. Okay, so here we are back on the Mayflower. They explore the coast, they find a place where they think they might settle. It's right behind us here in this picture. They say, oh, this is going to be a good spot. There doesn't seem to be anybody around. We're going to settle here. So they come ashore, they explore, they find skulls among the rocks on the seashore. They find unburied skeletons. It's kind of scary, and it's freezing cold. It's mid-December, but they come ashore. The Pilgrims lose fully half, 50% of their membership that first freezing winter. Firstly, they were malnourished. They had scurvy. They weren't starved. They had plenty of food, but just a combination. And then the local water. Remember Montezuma's Revenge? The local water, combined with whatever they, scurvy and so on, just sheer lack of proper nutrition. Connie's ancestors pass away with the exception of one teenage girl. And then no Indians. A few Indians that come, and people have come that yelled at them from the woods and then ran away and taunted them and stuff like that. But there was no
first encounter. There was a first encounter.
I was going to skip that, but there was a first encounter on a beach while the men were out exploring, and a shower of arrows came, and it was raining. And they managed to get some muskets to fire and loud banging noises, and these guys ran away, and nobody was hurt as far as we know. So that's a good thing.
Yeah. So
the earliest encounters were not positive, not friendly, and when they did land at Patuxet, there was nobody around. Nobody. They survived the first winter, terrified of the Indians, needless to say, all of them sick, half of them only surviving. Come the spring, think about how they felt. Now, let's go to the spring equinox, March 21st of 1621, the same year the first Thanksgiving occurred. They had built, miraculously, aside from everything else that went on, they were able to chop down some trees to build some little houses. They're depicted in the painting behind us here. And what tenacity, what extraordinary. They were incredibly competent people. They were good carpenters. They were good farmers. They could do pretty much good fishermen. They could do anything. They built this little village. They were just getting themselves organized, and imagine their psychological state. They had lost 50% of their closest people. Entire families were gone. Think of the emotional trauma. And then think that they were surrounded by Indian communities who had just lost maybe 90% of their people. I've never heard anybody mention the feelings of these people, the emotional trauma that both sides were in the midst of. Okay, just think about that. On a certain day, which happens to be the spring equinox, if all was well, the little village, there'd been no troubles with the Indians whatsoever. All of a sudden, an Indian walks into camp, a tall, beautiful guy. He's probably about 6'4". The women looked at him and go, whoa, this guy's gorgeous. He's wearing a little tiny loincloth, and what's going on? The men, on the other hand, ran and grabbed their guns, their muskets, and said, hold it, dude. The dude stops and says in English, welcome, Englishmen. They're like, what did you say? Welcome, Englishmen. Oh, okay, thank you. And they put the guns away and they sat down and they had a conversation. And this man who was from Maine, from Monhegan Island in Maine, who spoke some English because of his association with English sea captains, fishing captains, and so on. And we don't know what he was doing down in Massachusetts, but here he was. And he clearly had been sent to find out what these people were up to, because people had come and gone before. People had passed by, French fishing boats and traders had gone by, the Dutch, but nobody had come ashore and started building. So, excuse me, what are these folks up to? His job, his name is Samoset, was to find out. He said, okay, I'll be back. I've got to go to the local chief. I'm going to go talk to him, and I'm going to come back with another member of our people who speaks very good English. Have you heard of Squanto, Tisquantum, the famous Squanto, the one who taught them how to grow corn by putting fish in the mounds, in the growing mounds? So here we are. The first actual conversation between English and Indian occurred on that day. 5 days later, 90 warriors, including what the English called the king, the Massasoit, the chief, the paramount chief of a small tribe not far away, just over in present-day Rhode Island, shows up with his brother. Barbara Mary Kurfis just was talking about her ancestors, who are the Massasoit, and his brother Quadaquina. And 90 other people, including Squanto. And the whole thing began at that point. A very active interrelationship.
They kissed and sat down.
They did not kiss in an affectionate sexual sort of way. No, it was somehow this idea of holding out your hand and kissing the person you're greeting, and the bowing and all of those things. Yeah, they really did. They gave the chief some fire water, as we might call it, and he broke out in a sweat, but he loved it. They crafted a 6-point mutual protection treaty that day that lasted for 54 years. Okay, and during the next period that Connie calls the First Great Synthesis, where the English were learning from the Indians were learning from the English. That was a hugely significant moment in early American history. It was still British colonial. They were still saw themselves as subjects of their king, but they were able to live according to their own consciences. And the thing I wanted to talk about, being Thanksgiving right now, is gratitude. Can you imagine the gratitude of a local native people who had just lost 90% of their members to find themselves in an alliance with this little group of Englishmen who didn't have much in the way of weaponry? They had a couple of old muskets, and they had a couple of little brass cannons about this big that would make loud banging noises but wouldn't do much damage. But Massasoit, having lost most of his warriors and his people, was in a very dicey situation. And I'll close with this. Not far away, present-day Providence, Rhode Island, a tribe called the Narragansett. The plague never reached them. The pandemic never got to them. They didn't lose one single person to disease. And the Tarratines didn't get to them either. So the coastal peoples, had been decimated by a combination of war and disease. And that is now accepted. That's actually now being put in the history books. It's interesting. It wasn't there at the beginning. War and disease. So what was the war? The Tarratines' war. What was the disease? Pneumonic plague that took them out. And I've checked this out with the man who was the head of the CDC. His name is Dr. Stanley Foster. He is credited with eliminating smallpox from the planet. So you'd think he would know. he read this, and one of my writings that I'll share with anybody who wants to see it.
There's a link in the chat.
There's a link in the chat. And he said, you got it, it's impeccable. He said, for himself personally, he said, I always assumed it was smallpox because everybody thought the disease was smallpox. The first smallpox in New England was in Massachusetts, near Boston. This is now 13 years later, 1633, when a lot of the Puritans had arrived. It was the very beginnings of Boston, what was it called? Massachusetts Bay Colony and so on, right. 1633, some native traders came up from New York and they brought smallpox with them, and there was a very severe smallpox epidemic. But that was the first smallpox up north. So do you see, has anybody here heard anything different, any different stories? I've heard the Mayflower might have done some really nasty stuff. I've heard that, and we received a message last night, basically implying that, and what the hell are we talking about? What we're talking about is what actually happened. And there was a pandemic. It was between the years 1616 and 1618. The Mayflower arrived in 1620 and befriended the local Indians, and it stayed that way for more than half a century. So, friends, it's a beautiful story. It's a gem. The gratitude those two groups must have felt on this day 403 years ago to be able to hang out together for 3 days and play and have games and go hunting together and exchange all sorts of cultural information. It's a beautiful, beautiful gem at the founding of this country that has been spoiled and despoiled by revisionist history and misinformation. So that's my stance on it.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. Just helps everyone understand the human aspect of what was going on and how they came together in this transformative time of grief and of loss and differences. And that's this time now, with our a pandemic, with COVID, and now with all the division that's happening in the country. It's the time for us to get inspired by this time of bridging differences and coming together. So that's our message today, is to be inspired by this time at the origin of this nation, not in shame and blame and guilt and taking us down in frequency and vibration. Be inspired. Say, we did it once, we can do it again. And the original vision was that we have the right to act according to our connection to the divine, our highest selves. And that's true freedom. And I saw that through the Native people that I spent time with over the past 30 years, that's their understanding of true freedom. See, and the United States hasn't been a truly free country. We haven't been a true democracy. In the essence of Native knowing, there is a pathway to true freedom. And our work has to do with the syntheses that have occurred between the Europeans and the Native Americans that have given birth to this nation and into this process that we're in to arrive at this promise that America made to the world. And that's why people have flocked here from all over the world, because of this promise of liberty, justice, equality, abundance for all. It's in process, and it's up to us, each of us, to bring it to pass now. And as Jim was speaking of this breakdown for breakthrough, this is it. And we just encourage everyone to go to your inspiration, go to your inspired self, and look through differences with your family, and come and sit together and know that everyone wants the same thing. They're just seeing different pathways to that. And just be open with empathy and compassion and understanding, and have a wonderful Thanksgiving. So we just want to send you off with that. And
I have a final word.
Yes.
Do you remember at the very beginning, I said there's a word that we were going to address, and there's a word Jim had used in his opening, Ubiquity University goes to lots and lots of different places, including genocide. Last night, we received a message that said, Thanksgiving is just another word for genocide. Now, my question is this. In what I've just told you, where do you see the genocide? Just a question. Genocide, where?
It's another G. It's called gratitude.
Genocide is the intentional decimation of a culture or community. It's going into a certain genetic group of humans and intentionally killing them off. That's scary stuff. And the Mayflower Pilgrims have been very powerfully accused of that. But if there was a disease, which there was, a pandemic, 1616 to 1618, and the Mayflower arrived in the end of 1620, tell me, friends, how did the Mayflower pull that one off? They were magical, but that's pretty heavy magic.
Yeah, and we just really want to emphasize as well that 54 years of peace and friendship that ensued between these folks. That's a whole generation, the visionary leaders kept their people in peace at that vibration, but the children and the rest of the people who came to these shores weren't in that frequency, weren't in that vibration, and it's just set a model for this time and that synthesis of thinking of birth of the American mind, spirit, and democracy that was different from the European mind because of the relationship with the native people.
And I'll give you one more piece of information. That treaty that was crafted on the March 21st of 1621 was broken 54 years later by the Indians. Okay, so just so you know, this is historical fact. There's no question about it.
Well, thank you, Connie. Thank you, Andrew. This has been very, very fruitful and layered in terms of your presentation and your final question. I think what the best thing to do is just to bring this to a close, and we can go directly into the after chat for more intimate dialogue with one another.
Yeah.
But I really appreciate the deep history that you carry and the nuanced way that you've presented it. Yeah, hold your book up again.
And let me tell you one more thing about the book. It's not just a book. It started life as a screenplay, a really, really important film that is yet to be made. So if there's anybody out there who wants to help us make a film, this is a serious film, and the screenplay is in place. It was with some serious people in Hollywood in 2020, right as the pandemic broke out, right as COVID hit.
Wow.
And it's just sat on the back burner ever since. So just so you know, it's a hell of a story. It's really fun.
Set in Barbados in 2020.
It's set in Barbados in the year 2020. So it'd be a really, really fun film to make.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Yeah. Well, thank you both for this meditation on Thanksgiving and the complexities of history and life that come together in trauma and in duress. And yet out of that, for both sides, came an expression of gratitude. That's a beautiful metaphor and a beautiful lesson to us all. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
And that'll bring us to a close for today, everyone. You can join the after chat.
We will do that.
With Connie and Andrew. The link is in the chat. Stan just put it up. You received the link in your Zoom reminders for today. And then tomorrow, we're going to be joined again by Bettina Wickers, who will be deepening her presentation on the sociology of dementia, an ailment that plagues many, many people in increasing numbers around the world, particularly in the industrial society. So that'll be tomorrow on Humanity Rising. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy your Thanksgiving. Bye for now.